The fine arrived on the coldest morning of January, taped to my front door like some kind of threat. And the moment I read it, I knew my peaceful life in the Pine Ridge Estates subdivision of Boulder, Colorado was officially over. I stood there in my driveway, still holding my coffee mug, steam rising into the frigid air as I read the paper again. $500 for failure to maintain community snow removal standards. The absolute nerve of these people. I had shoveled my own driveway and walkway just fine, but apparently, according to the newly amended bylaws I never received notice about, I was also responsible for clearing the sidewalk that ran along the perimeter of the HOA common area adjacent to my property. Not my sidewalk. Not my property. Their sidewalk on their land that they wanted me to maintain. My name is Jake Brennan, and I had lived in this subdivision for 3 years without major incident. Sure, there were the occasional passive-aggressive notes about my trash cans being visible from the street for more than 12 hours, or the time they sent me a warning about my lawn being a 1/4 inch too tall, but this was different. This was them demanding I maintain their property and fining me when I did not even know about the requirement. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA management office immediately. A cheerful recorded message informed me that office hours were 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. It was 7:30 in the morning on a Tuesday, so I would have to wait. I went inside, got ready for work, and spent the entire drive to my construction office downtown seething about the injustice of it all. At exactly 9 o'clock, I called again. The phone rang 4 times before someone picked up. Pine Ridge Estates, HOA, this is Brenda speaking. Hi Brenda, this is Jake Brennan from 847 Pinewood Drive. I just got a $500 fine for not shoveling snow, and I need to discuss this because I was never notified about any change in policy. There was a pause, some typing sounds, and then Brenda spoke again in that same cheerful tone. Let me pull up your account. Okay, I see the fine here. It was issued by Karen Henderson, our HOA president. The new bylaws were approved at the December meeting and went into effect January 1st. I never got any notice about a December meeting, I said, trying to keep my voice level. The notice was posted on the community bulletin board and sent via email to all residents 30 days prior, Brenda recited, clearly reading from a script. I never got an email, and I do not regularly check a bulletin board in the middle of winter. That does not seem like adequate notice for a policy that comes with a $500 fine. I am sorry you feel that way, Mr. Brennan, but the bylaws you signed when you purchased your home state that it is the homeowner's responsibility to stay informed about HOA policies. Would you like to schedule a hearing with the board to dispute the fine? The next available date is March 15th. March 15th. 2 months away. I asked if there was anything sooner, and Brenda informed me, still in that maddeningly cheerful voice, that the board only met quarterly unless there was an emergency. So I am supposed to just pay a $500 fine for not following a rule I did not know existed. You can pay now or after the hearing, but if you wait until after the hearing and the board upholds the fine, there will be an additional late fee of $50 per week. I hung up. Not my finest moment, but better than saying what I actually wanted to say. I sat in my office, staring at my computer screen without really seeing it. My business partner, Marcus, noticed. You look like you are about to murder someone, he said from his desk across the room. I told him the whole story. Marcus had warned me about HOAs when I bought the place. He lived in an older neighborhood with no HOA and loved it. They are just little tyrants, he had said. Give people a tiny bit of power and they lose their minds. He was right, of course. I had dismissed his concerns at the time. The house was perfect, the neighborhood was nice, and I figured I could handle some annoying rules about lawn care. But this was different. "You know what you should do," Marcus said. "Go to the meeting when they have it. Bring everyone you can. These HOA boards hate when people actually show up." It was not bad advice, but March 15th was forever away. I pulled out the fine notice again and saw Karen Henderson's name at the bottom in flowing script, like she had personally signed each one. Below that was her phone number. I called it. "Hello." The voice was sharp, suspicious. "Hi, is this Karen Henderson? Who is calling?" "This is Jake Brennan. I live at 847 Pinewood Drive. I just received a fine from the HOA and I wanted to discuss it with you directly." There was a long silence. Then, "Mr. Brennan, all HOA business must go through the proper channels. If you wish to dispute a fine, you need to schedule a hearing." I tried that. "The next available date is 2 months away. I am trying to resolve this reasonably. I did not receive any notice about the bylaw change, so how can I be fined for breaking a rule I did not know existed?" Ignorance of the rules is not an excuse. Every homeowner has a responsibility to stay informed. If you had attended the December meeting, you would know about the changes. I did not get notice of the meeting. The notice was posted and emailed according to our procedures. If you did not receive it, perhaps you should check your spam folder or update your email address in our system. Her tone had shifted from sharp to condescending. I could practically hear the smug smile through the phone. Even if I somehow missed the notice, a $500 fine seems excessive for a first offense of a brand new rule. The fine structure is clearly outlined in the bylaws. This is not a negotiation, Mr. Brennan. You violated the rules. You pay the fine. If you do not like it, you should not have bought a house in an HOA community. Something in her voice, that absolute certainty that she was right and I was wrong, that I was somehow beneath her for daring to question her authority, made something snap inside me. I had dealt with difficult clients, unreasonable contractors, and all manner of workplace problems with patience and professionalism. But this woman, sitting in judgment over her neighbors like some kind of petty dictator, acting like she owned the neighborhood, pushed me past my limit. "I will see you at the hearing," I said, and hung up before she could respond. That evening I drove around the neighborhood to see who else had been fined. Sure enough, 6 other houses had the same notice taped to their doors. I knocked on each one. Most people were frustrated but resigned. "That is just how it is with HOAs," one neighbor told me. "Easier to just pay the fine and move on." But one neighbor, an older man named George who lived 3 houses down, was furious. "This is the 3rd time they have pulled something like this," he said. "They change the rules without proper notice, then fine everyone who does not immediately comply. It is a money grab, plain and simple." "Where does the money go?" I asked. George laughed bitterly. "Good question. According to the budget reports they send out once a year, it goes into the general fund for community maintenance and improvements. But I have been here 8 years, and I have not seen any improvements. The playground equipment is falling apart, the community pool needs resurfacing, and half the streetlights are burned out. But Karen somehow convinced the board they needed to hire a management company at $3,000 a month to help with administration." The more I learned, the angrier I got. This was not about maintaining property values or keeping the neighborhood nice. This was about control and possibly something worse. Over the next few days, I did my research. I pulled up the HOA bylaws, the original ones from when the subdivision was first established 15 years ago, and the amended versions that had been filed with the county. The amendment process required notice to all homeowners at least 60 days before a vote, and a quorum of at least 30% of homeowners to be present, or represented by proxy. I requested copies of the meeting minutes from the December meeting through the management company, as was my right according to the bylaws. It took 2 weeks and 3 follow-up calls, but eventually I received them. 8 people had attended the December meeting. Out of 147 homes in Pine Ridge Estates, 8 people. That was nowhere near the required quorum. The vote on the bylaw changes was invalid. I called Brenda again. I have reviewed the meeting minutes from December. The bylaw amendments were not properly approved. There was no quorum present. Let me check on that, she said. There were typing sounds, a long pause, and then, according to our records, there were sufficient proxies submitted to meet quorum requirements. Can you send me copies of those proxies? Another pause. I will need to check with Mrs. Henderson about that. She handles the proxy collection. Of course she did. I gave Brenda my email address and waited. Days passed with no response. I called again and got voicemail. I sent an email. Nothing. I was being stonewalled. Meanwhile, the snow kept falling. Colorado winters are unpredictable, and that January was particularly brutal. Every few days, another storm would roll through, dumping 6 to 10 inches of fresh powder. I kept my own driveway clear, as I always had. I had a nice truck with a plow blade I had installed myself, useful for my work and for keeping my property accessible. But I did not touch the HOA sidewalk along the common area. 2 weeks after the first fine, I got a second one. Another $500, plus the late fee on the first fine. A few days later, a third. The fines were piling up faster than the snow. I went to see a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Morrison, and she specialized in HOA disputes. Her office was in downtown Boulder, in one of those old brick buildings with creaky wooden floors and too much character. She listened to my story, reviewed the documents I brought, and nodded thoughtfully. "You have a good case," she said. "The bylaws clearly state the quorum requirements, and if they cannot produce valid proxies, the amendment is invalid. The fines would be unenforceable. So what do I do?" "Officially, you should wait for the hearing. Present your evidence and request that the fines be dismissed and the bylaw amendment be rescinded. If the board refuses, you can file a lawsuit." HOA cases like this usually settle quickly once lawyers get involved because the HOA does not want to pay legal fees. And unofficially, Patricia smiled. Unofficially, these cases are a huge pain and take forever. Even if you win, you will spend months dealing with this and probably a few $1,000s in legal fees. Some people decide the fight is not worth it. That is what they are counting on, is it not? That people will just give up and pay. Usually, yes. I thanked her for her time and paid her consultation fee. As I walked back to my truck, I thought about what she had said. They were counting on people giving up, on people deciding the fight was not worth it, and that was probably what I should do. Just pay the fines, shovel their sidewalk, and move on with my life. But I was tired of being pushed around, tired of petty tyrants like Karen Henderson using their little bit of authority to make other people's lives miserable. And I was especially tired of being treated like I was the problem for daring to question her. The next storm hit on a Friday night. By Saturday morning, there was 14 inches of fresh snow blanketing everything. I woke up early, had my coffee, and went out to plow my driveway. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful even in that way that only happens after a big snowfall. Everything was white and clean and still. I finished my driveway and sat in my truck for a moment, the engine idling, heat blowing through the vents. The HOA had a contract with a snow removal company that plowed the main roads through the subdivision after each storm. They had already been through once, pushing the snow to the sides and creating those big, packed berms at the end of every driveway. There was only one way in and out of Pine Ridge Estates, a single entrance off Baseline Road that connected to the main road network. The subdivision had been designed that way deliberately, with winding streets and cul-de-sacs, to keep through traffic out and maintain that quiet residential atmosphere. An idea formed in my mind. A terrible, petty, absolutely perfect idea. I put my truck in gear and drove slowly through the neighborhood toward the entrance. The snow removal company had done their usual job, creating a clear path down the middle of each street, maybe 12 feet wide, enough for 2 cars to pass carefully. At the entrance, where Pinewood Drive met Baseline Road, they had pushed all the excess snow into 2 massive piles on either side, creating a gateway maybe 15 feet wide. I positioned my truck at an angle across that gateway, blocking the entrance almost completely. Then, I started plowing. Not clearing snow, but moving it, pushing it from the piles back into the entrance, creating a wall of snow across the only way in or out of Pine Ridge Estates. I worked systematically, making pass after pass, building the wall higher and thicker. The packed snow from the removal company's work was heavy and solid, perfect for construction. It took me about 45 minutes to create a barrier about 4 feet high and 10 feet deep, stretching across the entire entrance. There was maybe a 2-foot gap on one side, barely enough for a person to squeeze through on foot, definitely not enough for a vehicle. When I finished, I backed my truck up, repositioned it directly in that gap and turned off the engine. Then I waited. It did not take long. The first person to discover my handiwork was my neighbor George, who pulled up in his sedan around 8:30, probably heading out to get groceries. He stopped, stared at the wall of snow and my truck blocking the entrance, and then climbed out of his car. I rolled down my window. "Jake, what are you doing?" he asked, but there was a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Civil disobedience," I said. "The HOA wants to fine me for not shoveling their property, so I figured I would help them understand what it really means when I do not clear snow." George laughed. "You are going to make a lot of people angry." "That is the idea." He shook his head, still smiling, and got back in his car. I watched him drive back to his house in my rearview mirror. Word would spread quickly now. By 9 o'clock, there were 5 cars backed up behind George's sedan, all trying to leave the subdivision. People were getting out, walking up to look at the barrier, taking pictures with their phones. Some of them yelled at me through my closed window. I just sat there, drinking coffee from my thermos, music playing softly on the radio. At 9:15, a silver Lexus SUV came barreling down the street from inside the subdivision, moving faster than it should on the snowy roads. It stopped abruptly about 10 feet from the line of cars, and a woman got out. She was probably in her late 40s, blonde hair in that aggressive soccer mom style, wearing designer workout clothes that had probably never seen the inside of a gym. Karen Henderson, in the flesh. She marched up to my window and pounded on it with her fist. I rolled it down halfway. "What do you think you are doing?" Her face was red, whether from cold or anger I could not tell. "Morning, Karen. Nice weather we are having." "You are blocking the entrance. You cannot do this." "Actually, I am exercising my property rights. This truck is my property, and I am legally parked on a public street. The snow barrier is on HOA common property, which according to the bylaws I am apparently responsible for maintaining. I am just doing some snow management. This is not funny. People need to get to work, to the store, to appointments. You need to move this truck and clear this snow right now." "I will get to it," I said. "Eventually. You know how it is, hard to keep up with all these snow removal responsibilities." Speaking of which, I have got about $1,500 in fines from you for not shoveling that sidewalk by the common area. I figure if I am paying that much, I should really take my snow management duties seriously. Make sure I am doing it right. Might take me a while." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You are doing this because of the fines, because you refuse to follow the rules like everyone else. I am doing this because you are charging me $500 a week to maintain your property, after changing the rules without proper notice and without a valid vote." I reviewed the December meeting minutes, Karen. There was no quorum. The bylaw amendment is invalid, which means all these fines are invalid, which means you have been running a scam on the residents of this community. That is ridiculous. We had plenty of proxies. Then show them to me. I have been requesting them for weeks and nobody will provide them. Why is that? She did not answer, just stared at me with pure hatred in her eyes. "I am calling the police," she said finally. "Go ahead." She pulled out her phone and walked back toward her car, still talking. I watched her in the mirror, gesturing angrily as she spoke. The line of cars behind the barrier was getting longer now, maybe 10 or 12 vehicles, and more people were getting out to see what was happening. I recognized several of them as neighbors I had talked to about the fines. A few of them were taking videos of Karen on their phones. 20 minutes later, a Boulder Police Department cruiser pulled up on the baseline road side of my barrier. A young officer got out, surveyed the situation, and walked carefully through the narrow gap beside my truck. He approached my window and I rolled it down again. "Morning, officer, morning. I am Officer Reynolds. I got a call about a vehicle blocking the road. Is this your truck?" "Yes, sir." "Can you tell me why you are parked here?" I explained the situation, keeping it factual and calm. The HOA had been issuing invalid fines for a rule change that was not properly approved. I was a resident expressing my disagreement with HOA policies by managing snow on HOA property, which they claimed I was responsible for. My truck was legally parked on a public street, and the snow barrier was on private HOA property. Officer Reynolds listened, made some notes, and then walked around to look at the barrier more closely. He talked to Karen, who was gesturing wildly and clearly demanding I be arrested or ticketed or dragged away. He talked to some of the other residents. Then he came back to my truck. "Here is the situation," he said. "Technically, you are right that your truck is legally parked on a public street. However, you are creating a public safety issue by preventing access to a residential area. Emergency vehicles cannot get in or out. If there was a fire or a medical emergency, people could die." He was right, and I had not thought of that. In my anger at Karen and the HOA, I had not considered the bigger implications. I felt a sinking sensation in my stomach. "However," Officer Reynolds continued, "this is fundamentally a civil dispute between you and your HOA. I cannot force you to move your truck without a court order, and I am not going to arrest you for parking legally. What I am going to do is strongly suggest that you move your truck and clear a path wide enough for emergency access, and I am going to suggest that you and Mrs. Henderson work this out like adults." "Okay?" "Yes, sir," I said. "That is fair." He walked back to talk to Karen, who did not look happy with his assessment. There was more animated discussion, more wild gesturing on her part. Finally, Officer Reynolds got back in his cruiser and drove away. I sat there for another minute, thinking. He was right about the emergency access. I could not in good conscience block the entire neighborhood because of my dispute with the HOA, no matter how justified my anger was. But I was not ready to just give up either. I started my truck, repositioned it, and began clearing a path through the barrier. Not the whole thing, just enough for a single vehicle to pass through carefully, maybe 8 feet wide. It took me another 20 minutes of work with the plow. When I finished, I moved my truck to the side of Baseline Road, still visible from the entrance but not blocking it anymore. Karen immediately started directing the line of backed-up cars through the narrow gap. Several people had to make multiple attempts, their vehicles too wide or their driving not quite precise enough for the tight space. It was slow, frustrating, and exactly the kind of inconvenience that I wanted the HOA to experience. I watched for a while, then drove back to my house. I had made my point. The real battle would be at the hearing in March. The next few weeks were tense. Karen filed a formal complaint against me with the HOA for destruction of HOA property and creating a safety hazard, which came with a $1,000 fine. I filed a formal complaint against her for issuing invalid fines and failing to provide documentation I was entitled to access, requesting a full audit of HOA finances and the removal of all board members involved in the fraudulent bylaw amendment. The neighborhood was divided. Some people thought I was a hero, standing up to HOA tyranny. Others thought I was a dangerous lunatic who had risked lives over a petty dispute. There were heated discussions on the neighborhood Facebook group, angry emails flying back and forth, and generally a level of drama that Pine Ridge Estates had never seen before. I used the time to build my case. I connected with the 6 other homeowners who had been fined for the sidewalk rule, and 5 of them agreed to join me in a joint complaint. George became my unofficial campaign manager, spreading the word about the March meeting and encouraging people to attend. We printed flyers with the facts about the invalid bylaw amendment and left them on every door in the subdivision. Karen fought back through official channels. I received notice that my complaint had been reviewed and rejected by the board, which consisted of Karen and 2 other people who were apparently her close friends. I received additional fines for my flyers, which the board claimed violated rules about posting unauthorized materials on HOA property. Never mind that I had put them on individual doors, not community bulletin boards. The fines kept piling up. By the end of February, the HOA claimed I owed over $5,000 in various penalties. I did not pay any of them. March 15th finally arrived. The hearing was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood pool that was used for HOA meetings and the occasional resident event. I arrived at 6:30 to find the parking lot already filling up. George had done his job well. By the time the meeting started, there were over 70 people crammed into a room designed for 40. Karen sat at the front table with the other board members, looking distinctly uncomfortable with the turnout. She called the meeting to order and tried to rush through the standard agenda items, but people kept interrupting with questions and comments. George made a motion to address the bylaw amendment issue first, before individual hearings, and it was quickly seconded and supported by most of the room. Karen had no choice but to allow discussion. I stood up and presented my evidence. The meeting minutes showing no quorum, the lack of proper notice to residents, the repeated refusal to provide the proxy documentation that would prove the vote was valid. I had prepared a handout with copies of all the relevant documents, and George and the other fined homeowners distributed them throughout the room. The mood shifted as people reviewed the information. Angry murmurs filled the room. Someone called for a vote to rescind the bylaw amendment. Someone else called for Karen to resign. It was getting chaotic. "This is out of order," Karen shouted over the noise. "We have proper procedures for these things. You cannot just call for votes on whatever you want." "Actually, we can," said a woman I did not recognize from the back of the room. According to the bylaws, any homeowner can propose a motion at a general meeting, and if it is seconded and approved by a majority of attendees, it carries. We have enough people here to constitute a quorum for a general meeting. I motion that we vote to rescind the snow removal bylaw amendment passed in December. Seconded. Multiple voices called out. Karen looked panicked. You need to submit motions in writing at least 2 weeks before a meeting. That is for the board meetings, the woman from the back said. She had clearly read the bylaws carefully. General meetings have different rules. Are you going to allow the vote or not? For a moment, I thought Karen might just walk out. Her face was pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table. But she was surrounded by dozens of angry neighbors, all staring at her, waiting. She had no choice. Fine, she said. All in favor of rescinding the December bylaw amendment. A forest of hands went up. I did not even bother counting, but it was clearly a majority. Opposed. Karen and her 2 board cronies raised their hands. Maybe 3 or 4 other people scattered around the room. That was it. The motion carries, Karen said, her voice tight. The bylaw amendment is rescinded. I motion that all fines issued under the rescinded bylaw be voided and refunded, George said immediately. Seconded. Another vote. Another overwhelming majority. Karen looked like she might cry, but I was not done yet. I stood up again. I have one more motion. I move that the HOA board commission an independent audit of HOA finances for the past 3 years, to be performed by an outside accounting firm and shared with all residents. The room went silent. This was the nuclear option, and everyone knew it. If there was financial impropriety, if Karen and the board had been skimming money or funneling it to friends or family, an audit would expose it. That is completely unnecessary, Karen said quickly. Our finances are properly managed and reviewed annually. Then you should have no problem with an independent audit, I said. Unless there is something you do not want residents to see, seconded. The woman from the back called out before Karen could respond. All in favor, George called out, not even waiting for Karen to conduct the vote. The hands went up again. Not quite as many as before, but still a clear majority. Karen stood up abruptly. This meeting is adjourned, she said, and walked out of the clubhouse. Her 2 board friends scrambled to follow her. The room erupted in conversation, people standing and clustering in groups, everyone talking at once. I found George and shook his hand. We did it, he said, grinning. We did, I agreed, but I do not think this is over. I was right. Over the next 2 weeks, Karen tried everything she could to block the audit. She claimed the vote was invalid because the meeting was not properly noticed as a general meeting. She claimed that an audit required board approval, not just a majority vote of residents. She even tried to argue that the 70 people at the meeting were not representative of the community and therefore could not make major decisions. But the bylaws were clear, and we had followed them properly. More importantly, the other residents were now engaged and angry. When Karen tried to delay, people showed up at her house to protest. When she sent emails claiming the votes were invalid, people replied with copies of the bylaws proving she was wrong. The neighborhood Facebook group became a running commentary on every move she made, and she did not have many defenders left. Finally, in early April, the audit began. The accounting firm spent 3 weeks reviewing HOA financial records, interviewing board members, and checking documentation. Their report was released in late April, and it was damning. The HOA had been paying Karen's management company, which turned out to be just Karen with a business license, $3,000 per month for services that were vaguely defined and poorly documented. The previous management company, which had been fired 2 years ago when Karen became president, had charged $600 per month and performed actual bookkeeping and administrative services. Karen's company apparently did nothing but cash the checks. Additionally, the HOA had hired Karen's brother-in-law to perform landscaping services at twice the market rate. Several other vendors were connected to Karen or the other board members in ways that suggested conflicts of interest at minimum and fraud at worst. In total, the audit estimated that Karen had cost the HOA approximately $180,000 in the 3 years she had been president. Money that should have gone to maintaining the neighborhood, fixing the playground, resurfacing the pool, and keeping the streetlights working. The report was shared with every resident. An emergency general meeting was called. Karen did not attend. The residents voted unanimously to remove her and the other board members, to file a police report for investigation of possible embezzlement, and to pursue civil litigation to recover the stolen funds. I was asked to join the new board. I declined. I had never wanted to be involved in HOA politics in the first place. I just wanted to be left alone to live in my house in peace. But I did agree to serve on the finance committee to help clean up the mess and make sure this never happened again. The police investigation took several months. Karen initially denied everything, claiming the audit was biased and that her management company provided valuable services. But the evidence was overwhelming. Her business had no employees, no office, no documentation of any services performed. The checks just went into her personal bank account. Her brother-in-law admitted under questioning that Karen had pressured him to inflate his invoices and kick back part of the money to her. In November, almost a year after that first fine had appeared on my door, Karen Henderson was arrested and charged with embezzlement, fraud, and theft. The district attorney estimated she had stolen over $200,000 when interest and other hidden fees were included. She eventually pled guilty to avoid trial and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, plus restitution to the HOA. Her house went up for sale shortly after her sentencing. I heard through the neighborhood gossip chain that she was getting divorced and that her husband was trying to distance himself from the whole situation. The house sold fast, to a young couple with a toddler who seemed nice enough when I met them at the neighborhood block party that summer. The new HOA board was competent and reasonable. They reduced fees, brought in a legitimate management company at a fair price, and started actually maintaining the common areas. The playground got new equipment. The pool was resurfaced. The streetlights all worked. It was what the HOA should have been all along, a boring administrative body that handled the basic shared responsibilities of the neighborhood without drama or power trips. I kept my plow truck, of course. Colorado winters do not stop just because the HOA drama ended. But I never had to use it for anything except clearing my own driveway and helping out neighbors when they needed it. The HOA hired a reliable snow removal company that did good work at reasonable rates, and nobody ever tried to fine me for not shoveling their sidewalks again. Sometimes I drive past the entrance to Pine Ridge Estates and remember that morning when I blocked the road with a wall of snow. It was petty and vindictive, and probably not my finest moment. But it was also the catalyst that exposed real corruption and saved the neighborhood a lot of money in the long run. So maybe it was worth it. George still lives 3 houses down. We have become good friends, often grabbing beers at the local brewery and laughing about the whole situation. He likes to tell people at parties about the time his neighbor went to war with the HOA and won. I tell him that is an exaggeration, that I just stood up for myself and happened to uncover something bigger in the process. Call it what you want, he always says. But you are the reason Karen Henderson is not stealing from us anymore. You are the reason this neighborhood works now. Sometimes you have to break a few rules to fix a broken system. Maybe he is right. I do know that I learned some important lessons from the whole experience. I learned that HOAs can be useful when run by honest people with good intentions, but they can also become vehicles for petty tyrants and thieves when nobody is paying attention. I learned that most people would rather just pay an unfair fine than fight back, which is exactly what people like Karen count on. And I learned that sometimes the best way to expose injustice is to push back hard enough that the whole rotten structure comes tumbling down. The story could have ended badly. I could have been the one arrested for blocking emergency access, or sued for harassment, or just ground down by endless fines and legal fees until I gave up. Karen could have gotten away with her scheme if I had just paid those first few fines and moved on with my life like everyone expected me to. But I got lucky. Officer Reynolds was reasonable. The other residents were willing to listen and get involved once they knew the truth. The audit uncovered enough evidence to make the criminal case clear-cut, and I had the resources and the stubbornness to see it through to the end. Not everyone would be so lucky. There are probably thousands of Karen Hendersons out there, running HOAs across America, skimming money and abusing their authority and getting away with it because nobody has the time or energy or knowledge to fight back effectively. It is a depressing thought. But there are also thousands of people like George and the other residents who showed up at that March meeting, who voted to demand accountability, who refused to just accept that this was how things had to be. People who believe that communities should be run honestly and fairly, and who are willing to do the work to make that happen. In the end, that is what saves us from the petty tyrants. Not laws or rules or official procedures, though those help. What saves us is people deciding they have had enough, standing up, and demanding better. Sometimes that looks like attending a boring HOA meeting. Sometimes it looks like filing formal complaints and requesting audits. And sometimes, apparently, it looks like blocking a road with a plow truck full of snow at 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning. I would not recommend that last one as a general strategy. But I would recommend paying attention to what your HOA is doing with your money and your community. Read the bylaws. Go to the meetings. Ask questions when things do not make sense. Vote when you have the chance. Run for the board if you can stomach it. Most HOA problems are caused by apathy, by residents who just want to live their lives and assume someone else is handling the boring administrative stuff. That assumption is what people like Karen Henderson count on. They count on nobody checking their work, nobody questioning their authority, nobody caring enough to look at the numbers and notice when things do not add up. They count on the fact that $500 is annoying but not quite annoying enough to be worth a fight. They count on people like me just paying the fine and moving on, but I did not move on. I got angry, I got stubborn, and I got even. And in the process, I helped fix a broken system and recover a lot of money for my neighbors. So maybe George is right. Maybe sometimes you do have to break a few rules to fix a broken system. Just make sure you know what you are doing first. And maybe do not block any roads. The final chapter of the whole saga came about 6 months after Karen's sentencing. The HOA received a check for $160,000 as part of the restitution agreement. It was not the full amount she had stolen, but it was more than anyone expected to recover. The new board held a meeting to discuss what to do with the money. Some people wanted to reduce HOA fees for a few years, effectively giving everyone a refund. Others wanted to invest it all into capital improvements, fixing everything that had been neglected during Karen's reign. There was a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, but it was civil and productive. This was what HOA meetings should be like, people working together to make decisions for their community. In the end, we compromised. Half the money went to a reserve fund for future major repairs and emergencies. A quarter went to immediate improvements, including new security cameras at the entrance after there had been some package thefts. And a quarter was used to reduce fees for 2 years, giving every homeowner a small refund on the money that had been stolen from them. It was fair, it was reasonable, and everyone seemed satisfied with the outcome. That meeting was boring in the best possible way. No drama, no accusations, just people making practical decisions about shared resources. This was what I had thought I was signing up for when I bought a house in an HOA community. I still live in Pine Ridge Estates. My house is paid off now, and I have no plans to move. The neighborhood is quiet and peaceful, the way it should be. Kids play in the newly renovated playground. People actually use the pool in the summer now that it has been fixed up. The streetlights work. The roads get plowed promptly when it snows. It is everything a good neighborhood should be. Sometimes I see new residents moving in and I think about warning them, telling them to pay attention to their HOA, to read the bylaws, to go to the meetings even when it seems boring and pointless. Because it only takes one Karen Henderson to turn a good community into a nightmare, and the only defense is an engaged and informed group of residents who care enough to pay attention. But mostly, I just wave hello and welcome them to the neighborhood. Because Pine Ridge Estates is a good place to live now. The system works, the people running it are honest and competent, and there are enough residents paying attention to make sure it stays that way. And if it ever does not, if some future board member decides to follow in Karen's footsteps and start abusing their authority for personal gain, well, I still have my plow truck, and I know exactly where the entrance to the subdivision is. I would not really block it again, probably, but it is nice to know I could if I had to. That is the thing about standing up to bullies and tyrants. Once you do it successfully once, you know you can do it again if necessary, and they know it too. Which means they are a lot less likely to try pushing you around in the first place. Word gets around. The new board members all know the story of what happened with Karen. They know that the residents of Pine Ridge Estates are not passive, are not going to just accept whatever decisions the board makes without question. That is healthy. That is how it should be. An HOA should be accountable to the people it serves, not the other way around. And if it takes the occasional act of civil disobedience to maintain that balance of power, well, that is a small price to pay for a functional community. I never did get an apology from Karen, not that I expected one. People like that never think they did anything wrong. In her mind, she was probably the victim, persecuted by ungrateful neighbors who did not appreciate all her hard work. That is how people justify this stuff to themselves. They convince themselves they deserve the money, that they are entitled to it somehow, that the rules do not really apply to them. But the rules do apply. The law applies. And when you steal from your neighbors, when you abuse the trust people placed in you, there are consequences. Sometimes those consequences take a while to arrive. Sometimes they require someone stubborn enough to fight back when everyone else just wants to pay the fine and move on. But they do arrive eventually. Justice is slow, but it is real. Karen Henderson is in prison now, her reputation destroyed, her marriage over, her life in ruins. I do not take pleasure in that exactly. I would have preferred she never stole from us in the first place, that the HOA had just functioned normally, that I had never received that first ridiculous $500 fine on that cold January morning. But given what did happen, given the choices she made and the crime she committed, I am satisfied with the outcome. She faced real consequences for her actions. The money was recovered, or at least a good portion of it. The system was fixed. The neighborhood is better now than it was before. And I learned that I am capable of fighting back when necessary, of standing up for myself and my neighbors even when it would be easier to just go along. That is worth something too. Maybe worth more than the recovered money or the new playground equipment or the reduced HOA fees. It is worth knowing that you are not powerless, that you can make a difference when something is wrong, that one person with evidence and determination and a healthy amount of righteous anger can actually change things for the better. We live in a time when it is easy to feel powerless, when big systems and institutions seem immovable, when fighting back seems pointless. But it is not pointless. It matters. Local matters. Your HOA matters. Your neighborhood matters. The small daily injustices matter because they add up to big problems if nobody ever pushes back. And sometimes pushing back is as simple as refusing to pay an unjust fine and asking to see the paperwork that justifies it. Other times it involves blocking a road with a truck full of snow, but I am really not recommending that as a general strategy. The point is, you have more power than you think you do. The rules are there to protect you as much as to constrain you if you bother to read them and understand them. Organizations like HOAs depend on nobody paying attention, nobody asking questions, nobody demanding accountability. The moment you start paying attention and asking questions, the whole house of cards can come tumbling down. So pay attention. Ask questions. Demand accountability. Go to the boring meetings. Read the boring documents. Vote in the boring elections. Because the alternative is letting people like Karen Henderson run your community, and that is far worse than any amount of boredom. That is the real lesson I learned from this whole experience. Not that blocking roads is an effective protest strategy, though apparently it can be in very specific circumstances. The real lesson is that civic engagement matters, even at the smallest local level. Especially at the smallest local level. Because that is where the decisions that affect your daily life get made, where the rules you have to follow get written, where your money gets spent. If you do not pay attention to that stuff, someone like Karen will. And they will use your apathy and disengagement to enrich themselves at your expense. They will count on you not noticing, not caring, not fighting back. They will count on you deciding that $500 is annoying but not quite annoying enough to be worth a fight. Do not give them that satisfaction. Fight back. Stand up for yourself. Read the bylaws. Attend the meetings. Demand to see the financial records. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Make them prove that the rules they are enforcing are actually valid. Make them justify the money they are spending. Make them work for their authority instead of just assuming they have it. And if all else fails, well, I am not saying you should block any roads. But knowing that you could if you absolutely had to, that you have options even when it feels like you do not, that knowledge is powerful all by itself. The snow has started falling again as I write this. Another Colorado winter. Another season of early mornings and cold coffee and the scrape of plow blades on asphalt. But this time, there are no fines waiting on my door, no angry HOA presidents demanding I maintain their property at my expense. This time it is just snow, just weather, just the normal challenges of living in the mountains. I will plow my driveway in the morning. I will probably help George with his since his back has been bothering him lately. Maybe some of the other neighbors too if they need it. Not because an HOA is forcing me to, not because I am afraid of fines, but because it is the right thing to do. Because that is what good neighbors do for each other. That is what community is supposed to be. People helping each other voluntarily, working together because they want to. Because they care about each other and the place where they live. Not people forcing each other to comply with arbitrary rules. Not board members abusing their authority for personal gain. Not petty tyrants sending out fines and threatening their neighbors. Pine Ridge Estates is that kind of community now. It took a fight to get here, took exposing corruption and demanding accountability and, yes, blocking a road with a plow truck full of snow one memorable Saturday morning. But we got here, and it was worth it. Every time I drive past that entrance, every time I see the security cameras and the well-maintained landscaping and the smooth, plowed streets, I think about that morning and smile. I would do it again if I had to, but I am glad I do not have to. I am glad we fixed the problem, caught the criminal, and built something better. That is the happy ending. Not that the hero rode off into the sunset, but that the community came together and fixed itself. That justice was served and the system was repaired. That we proved people like Karen Henderson do not get to win just because they have a title and a little bit of authority. The good guys won this time. The neighborhood is better for it, and I got to keep my plow truck. That is all any of us can really ask for, right? A fair system, honest leaders, and the occasional opportunity to stand up for what is right even when it is inconvenient or difficult or makes you unpopular for a while. That is democracy in action, local edition, HOA style. And if the price of that democracy is attending boring meetings and reading boring bylaws and occasionally staging a dramatic protest involving snow removal equipment, well, that is a price I am willing to pay. Because the alternative is so much worse. Karen Henderson taught us that. She showed us exactly what happens when nobody is paying attention, when the wrong person gets a little bit of power, when there are no checks and balances to prevent abuse. She showed us the worst-case scenario, but we also showed her something. We showed her that communities can fight back. That truth and evidence and determined residents can overcome corruption and abuse. That you can steal for a while, but eventually someone will notice, someone will care enough to dig deeper, and the whole scheme will come crashing down. I hope she thinks about that sometimes, sitting in her cell. I hope she realizes that if she had just been honest, if she had just done the job she was elected to do without trying to enrich herself, she would still be living in her nice house with her husband, still have her reputation and her freedom and her life. That the $160,000 she stole was not worth 3 years in prison and losing everything else. But probably she does not think that. Probably she still sees herself as the victim, unfairly persecuted by vindictive neighbors. That is how people like that think. They never accept responsibility for their own actions. It is always someone else's fault. Whatever she thinks, it does not really matter anymore. She is gone, her influence is gone, and Pine Ridge Estates is better off without her. We learned our lesson about paying attention to who we elect and what they do with our money. We learned that HOA board members need oversight just like any other position of authority. We learned that civic engagement is not optional if you want your community to function properly. Those are good lessons, even if they came at a high cost, and I got a pretty good story out of it too. The time I went to war with my HOA over snow removal and accidentally uncovered a massive embezzlement scheme. George is right that it makes for good conversation at parties. But more than that, I got my neighborhood back. I got a community that works the way it should, where people look out for each other and the shared systems function properly, and nobody is skimming money or abusing authority or sending out ridiculous fines for made-up violations. I got peace of mind knowing that my HOA fees are actually going toward maintaining the neighborhood, not lining someone's pockets. That is the real victory. Not blocking the road, not the dramatic board meeting, not even Karen going to prison. The real victory is having a functional community again. Having boring HOA meetings where nothing dramatic happens because everything is running smoothly. Having board members who do their jobs competently without making it all about power and control. That is what I fought for. That is what was worth fighting for. And that is what we got. So yes, the HOA fined me for not shoveling their snow. And yes, I blocked their only plowed road with my plow truck in response. But the story is bigger than that. It is about standing up to corruption, about community organizing, about the importance of civic engagement even at the smallest local level. It is about what happens when regular people decide they have had enough and demand accountability from their leaders. It is about democracy working the way it is supposed to work, messy and difficult, and sometimes requiring dramatic gestures to get people's attention, but ultimately producing a better outcome for everyone involved. Well, everyone except Karen Henderson. But she made her choices and earned her consequences. The rest of us are doing just fine. And that, finally, is the end of the story. The HOA that tried to fine me for not shoveling their snow learned that I was not going to be pushed around. The corrupt board president who thought she could steal from her neighbors without consequence ended up in prison. The neighborhood that had been apathetic and disengaged learned the importance of paying attention to their local government. And I learned that sometimes fighting back, even when it is difficult and risky and seems like more trouble than it is worth, is exactly the right thing to do. Also, I learned that blocking roads with snow plows is surprisingly effective at getting people's attention, though I still do not recommend it as a first option for resolving HOA disputes. But if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, if your HOA is abusing its authority or issuing unjust fines or generally making your life miserable, remember this story. Remember that you have more power than you think. Remember that the rules are supposed to protect you, not just constrain you. Remember that one determined person with evidence and a refusal to back down can make a real difference. And remember that sometimes the best response to an unjust fine is not to just pay it and move on. Sometimes the best response is to fight back, to demand accountability, to refuse to be pushed around by petty tyrants who think a title gives them unlimited authority. Just maybe leave the plow truck out of it, unless absolutely necessary. Then all bets are off.